Daniele Romeo is an Italian expat living in Hungary, earlier in Italy, UK, USA and Ireland. He is member or former member of following parties. In Italy, Partito Comunista, Partito Democratico della Sinistra, Democratici di Sinistra, Partito Democratico, Articolo 1, Democrazia e Autonomia. In the United Kingdom, Labour Party. In Ireland, Irish Labour Party. And in Hungary, DK. Where were you born and how you grew up? How was your political socialization?
I was born in Italy, near Torino, and from an army family. My father was a carabiniere, army officer, military police officer. Politically, I would call it a conservative, fairly right-wing environment. I grew up on a police station. My father had an apartment inside the police station, and I was in touch with mainly right-wing, let's call it patriotic ideas, as you can imagine from an army family. But there was always in me a sense of social justice. I always looked at the, kind of Robin Hood type of politics, standing for the weak, for the people who are oppressed. This deep sense of injustice a lot of children have. You don't like to see the weak put down. You don't like to see injustice. You don't like to see poverty. I was not brought up in a Catholic environment, but like all Italians, I did all my my time in the church, in the Sunday school, we call it, and but I wasn't a religious family. But still, the sense of sharing, the sense of giving, it was always part of my background. And I say until the end of high school, I wasn't really active in politics. My first membership was at university for the Partito Comunista, which was meanwhile becoming already, because it was after 1989, it was already becoming another changing name. So it was planned, like many communist parties all over Europe, changed name after 89. Even the Italian Communist Party decided to change name. And when I joined, I knew I was going to join an organization that was changing. And I continued until I left Italy with the Partito Democratico della Sinistra. I would say all my university years were in a very left-wing environment. It was no longer attached to the family. Politics was not only a discussion at the dinner table, but it became real politics, so meetings, membership cards and a bit of leafleting, lots of seminars, and that was...
Why you moved abroad from Italy?
After graduation, I wanted to take a kind of sabbatical. So I have some family in New York, and I decided to go and visit, and I remained for 3 years. I met my now ex-wife, and after 3 years we decided to move to London, a bit closer to Hungary and to Italy. That was the main reason for moving to the UK. But initially it was simply for, I don't want to call it sense of adventure, but having your experiences and experience, a society that I never really loved. I was never really crazy for America or American things. I wasn't anti-American, even though I was a member of the Communist Party, but I could see already all the contradictions in American society, but I wanted to see it with my own eyes. And that was the reason why I moved. And then, as it often happens, you move for one reason and you remain there.
And what are your main critical points on the American system, and if you compare to Europe, how you find the American state and the European functioning of the state?
Well, the first thing I noticed is a big difference between the institutions, and America, the people. Because I noticed that, for example, the level of participation is very high. There's lots of volunteering because the state is absent, mainly. They don't have a state everywhere like us. And often the volunteering supports what the state does not give. But what we really liked was the sense of participation. And the main difference is that, well, I think now we have it in Europe as well, kind of anti-state, feelings. But, in the US, nobody really likes the state. They consider the state a bit of an enemy, The state is on one side and the people on the other. There isn't really the culture of we are the state is the people. I think these feelings is being transferred also to us. A lot of people are detached from politics. They feel like separated from the states. But in the United States of America, I've seen it more than in Europe at the time. I'm talking about 30 years ago. And of course the social welfare. I mean, think about the healthcare system. The richest country in the world, the gap between rich and poor. We could speak for days about these topics. But it's so incredible that Cuba has a longer life expectancy than the United States.
From those countries you have lived at, Italy, UK, Ireland, Hungary and the USA, what are the pros and contras as a place to live there?
Well, they're actually quite different places from one another. I think, well, the pros is the English language, compared, for example, to Hungary, but also probably in the case of the United States, the acceptance of a foreigner is very, very different. Perhaps because I'm white, I noticed that if I was probably an African, they would have treated me in a different way. But if you go to the United States, you master the language more or less, you are one of them almost immediately. Yes, they ask you probably when they read your name, they ask you where you're from. Everybody's from somewhere in the United States anyway. Very few people can go back more than 50, 60, 100 years. So, but you're immediately part of society. And I have to say, even in England, of course, knowing the languages helps, but normally you can enter almost immediately in the... they are very cosmopolitan from that point of view. And I noticed that perhaps is the tradition, the colonial tradition, the imperial tradition. There were people coming from abroad 200, 300 years ago already. So, but pros and cons, I would say that life is more or less the same. You have your job, your routine, and I see a lot of positive things in Hungary, for example. I found a lot of bureaucracy more efficient than I thought.
For example?
Well, even having a passport, having your documents, your driving license, your residence card. I don't know if it changed now, but in Italy it was a very, very long process. Even having your passport issued. It was a kind of long process. In Hungary, local people, not me, because I'm not a citizen, they can have a passport within days. And having been in other countries as well, yes, probably it was quite efficient also in the UK, but you would expect that perhaps. But it surprised me because maybe it's a bit of stereotyping, but people think about bureaucracy, the old communist system, but it's actually not true. It's fairly efficient. That's what I noticed from a practical point of view.
why you moved to Hungary, and was it a big cultural shock when you first moved here, and why then you decided to stay here?
Oh, just family
permanently?
reason. Just family reasons. Because when I divorced, my ex-wife moved to Hungary with my son, and I just wanted to be closer to my son. It wasn't a culture shock because during my marriage, I came to Hungary almost once or twice a year, and I got to know a little bit the culture, few words of the language, very few. But no, I don't think it's from a cultural point of view. Matter of fact, I find it more similar to Italy than Ireland or UK.
What are the similarities between Hungary and Italy besides the colors of the flag?
Yes, no, it's not the color, but perhaps it's slightly more Mediterranean. Even the people, the tradition, the food perhaps certainly better than English food and Irish food. Even there is more like a culture of staying together, and the fact that they produce wine. Hungary is a big wine country like Italy. Normally when there is wine, there is food. A country that produces wine, especially red wine, is normally a country where you have a good culinary tradition. And although it's not as elaborate as the Italian one, it was a pleasant change from Ireland and England, where they're not exactly famous for that. It's more warm, it's a warmer place. I think people slightly more friendly than in general. But I never had problems really, even in other countries.
You are a member of, were in certain stages of your life, a member of several leftist parties in different countries. How can you describe these parties as political communities? In what point are they similar and different if you compare them to each other?
Well, I say that the Italian Communist Party that I experienced only at the very end, and in a very negative phase for communism in general, but they were like a family. The party I felt the closest, I think, was the UK Labour. I didn't have any particular position in the party. I wasn't like a party leader at a local level, or I was elected or something. I was a simple activist. But I liked the devotion for many of the members, the culture, in some cases the tradition passed on from father to son. The trade union, the link with the trade union, which is very important to me. Trade union and political parties should go together, like in the UK, but is very rare in other countries. The UK Labour Party was founded by the trade unions. And I liked I was also a trade union member. And the link between party and trade unions, I think I really appreciated that. And yes, the profound culture, political culture rooted in many years of activity of these parties, that somehow in Italy has been lost. And in Hungary, perhaps after the breakup of the MSMP, with the multi-party system, I think there is a risk of losing the political culture, the background. I mean, in the UK, you can easily go 150 years back. Local sections, local chapters of the Labour Party, they have photos from 100 years ago of past leaders, local leaders I'm talking about. And I really appreciate all that.
How do you find the current political situation in Italy, UK, US, Ireland and Hungary?
Well, there is a general right-wing, all these countries, funny enough, except for the United States at the moment, but we might see a Trump come back or a Republican come back. We see now the midterm elections in November was going to be, but probably it will be a big Republican comeback. So yes, all these countries actually shifted to the right. And even, and what is strange for the UK, for example, is an ideological right. One of the main features of the British Conservatives was to be non-ideological, very pragmatic. Yes, conservative, but very pragmatic. Pro-business, liberal. But now we are really witnessing, since Brexit, we are witnessing an ideological right, which is something new, at least to me, to us. I mean, you have to go back to many years to see this kind of strong ideology. And even Thatcher, who was probably one of the most ideological prime ministers, was not, at the end of the day, she was a true liberal. Yes, she waved the flag, but certainly there was not the how can I say, there was not this right-wing undertones that you can hear, the racism often mentioned in British politics, this aggressive posture towards poverty, and it was very, normally British conservatism was very moderate, and now it became more extreme, more right-wing, probably radicalized by the Brexit, the Scottish referendum as well, that, you know, made British nationalism again, you know, part of the political conversation, you know, that it wasn't before. So the referendum. And then now Italy, we have the case of the right wing winning, which was predicted. And so it's a trend. It's a trend. And not a very good one, but I always say that the responsibilities is of the people before that. So the left, the central left, didn't manage to address the problems that appeared in the last 20 years. So all the damages of neoliberal politics and the increase in poverty, the gap between rich and poor, the left was not able to address that. So I think the right is taking over. They are covering with the patriotism, what are the, you know, other needs of society that the left could not address, I think.
Are you currently active in the politics like before, or rather resigning from the politics under these circumstances and just building their own house?
Well, I feel a little bit orphan of a political movement because I believe in politics as a mass movement, not as in little parties, niche parties with small membership who just excessively ideological. A party should be a party that wants to run a country. It can end up in the opposition, but the objective is to run the country. And it has to be a real reformist party, so reforms of the system, change of the system, against neoliberal system should be there. And to be honest with you, there's very little on offer at the moment. You can find only small parties, but very radical, sometimes too radical, sometimes, in fact, they are conservative because they are nostalgic of days that they cannot come back anyway, you know, they're nostalgic of communism, whereby we need to find an alternative, but it has to be an alternative, a reasonable alternative with in today's society. So not something looking back to an age that had some pros, but also a lot of cons. So, and then there is very little offer at the moment. Social democracy has failed. It's a failure because it lasted for a few years, gave good welfare for the people, free healthcare, pensions and everything, but could not protect from the counterattack of neoliberalism. So now we find ourselves on the defensive. Civil rights are eroded, social rights are eroded, pensions, job security is all going, and there's nobody to protect that. The socialists became liberal, so there's no more job security, we need to take care of the business, we need to think about the entrepreneurs, and nobody's standing for the small people, except for some very small radical, revolutionary parties and everything. So there's very little offer at the moment. You either go to the right, which is neoliberal in the economy, and very conservatives on social rights, so they family, religion, God, anti-abortion, anti-LGBT, or you go to this social democracy which is pro-LGBT, pro-civil rights and everything, but they don't give anything to the working people.
What can be the solution?
Well, the solution is simply to stand for the... Look at what the problems are. You find, everybody's saying now, if you open every newspaper, even the Financial Times, they say, 3% of the people are richer than half of the rest of the world, or so 3% have more wealth than the rest of the world. So address that problem. Simple. So it's the numbers, but nobody wants to do it. Progressive taxation, fight tax evasion, invest in education, invest in a healthcare system. We're coming out of hopefully coming out of a crisis, the COVID crisis, which put all over the world the healthcare system in the front line. And all the healthcare systems failed because there's been underinvestment in almost every country in the last 20 years. I could see that in Italy, I could see that in England. And of course, if you don't invest, the services decay. So we've seen privatization, and nobody is fighting privatization. Sometimes you see socialist government encouraging privatization. The right wing, we know that. Conservatives, they are pro-privatization. But even the so-called left do that. So that's the thing. You see socialist parties standing for companies, for multinationals. That's not really what they should be about.